He's afraid. He's afraid. It's okay. It's okay. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Jewish course of why, in which I will try to provoke discussion and perspective, and not necessarily answers. Answers are something that every person has to sit well with you. So it could be an answer for you, or not necessarily an answer for you. But discussion and perspective, that's something I hope to present. Okay, yeah.
Well, I spoke to you on the phone the other day. I told you I was at the cemetery. And I asked you a question.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to answer that.
We're gonna.
No, you don't have to answer that now. But that is something. There's a logical, whatever reason, fact.
100.
Now, it's not an opinion. It's based on
Right.
something.
I understand. Okay, so in the course of in this course, there's 50 questions. That's one of the questions that are going to be. Right. So what we're going to do is like this.
It's going to be answered like, oh, the rock, because that.
You'll see. You'll see when the answer comes. If it's we'll try to do everything according to it. So the course is divided into 5 categories. The 5 different types of questions we're going to. There's theological, Jewish identity, Jewish history, Jewish law, and Jewish custom. And we'll try to answer the questions as much based on fact, and some of them is going to be belief, some of them is going to be tradition, and we'll try our best to make it sit well with you. So the way the class is going to work is like this. There's a lot of information, okay? And these are only some of the questions, and it's not going to cover everything. So what I did was I put an empty paper next to you, and we're going to break halfway through the class, and I put a bowl, okay? If you guys have a question, you want to ask anonymously, okay? So we're not going to break for questions. We're going to have a halftime break for coffee and tea, whatever it is. Have your question, put it in the bowl, and afterwards we'll do like a lightning round at the end of the class. We'll pick our questions and we'll try to answer as many as possible. I'll try to do my best without preparing and everything else. That's how many notes. Okay. So ideally, I put the cards over here. All of you have these orange cards, and on this table there's 50 cards, which represent the 50 questions we're going to discuss tonight. So we're going to skip the card exercise because we only have a small crowd to start with. All right. So the first question is really the basis and the foundation of the entire course. Why ask in Judaism? Isn't Judaism a belief system as opposed to a questioning system? Usually the rabbi tells you that's what it is. As they say in Yiddish, Azay Yizdas, or in Hebrew, Kacha. That's it, because I said so, right? So are we allowed to ask why? Isn't Judaism only about belief? So some people say that ideally Jews are only supposed to believe and not supposed to ask. But because God understands human beings, we're always asking questions, right? That's the way we are. So as a concession, he allows us to ask why. In fact, it's interesting. There's a tribe called the Moken tribe. They live off the coast of Thailand. They're a nomadic tribe, and they don't dwell on physical possessions. So they don't have words for want and take or mine. So you would think in Judaism there would be no word for why, because why would be an outlawed word. But we find it's just opposite. If you look at text number 1 in page 2 of your temporary copies, I was telling them that because of Passover, the real books didn't make it here in time. But God willing, by next week we will have them. So as you see in text number 1, the Maimonides says that even King Solomon tried to understand the mitzvot that are super rational. Because there are 2 kinds of mitzvot. There are 2 kinds of laws. There's what's called mishpatim. Mishpatim means judgment. The reason why it's called judgment is because anybody with their common sense and judgment can figure out that you're not supposed to steal and you shouldn't kill. These are what's called mishpatim. Then there's another category of law which is called chukim. And as you see, the kosher symbol is on there because that's one of the classic super rational laws. There's no real reason given in the Torah. Some people can say benefits, but there's not a reason why we can't mix milk and meat. and even if it's a health benefit, the extension to where we take it, the separate dishes and everything else, that definitely doesn't make sense. So and there's no real reason why we can't eat cow, and we could eat cow, we can't eat pork. That's something that God decreed. So you would think, okay, God said so, that's it. But we see that King Solomon, the wisest of all men, he tried to understand as much as possible. So it's not just faith. We're supposed to try to understand as much as possible the wisdom of God. And I keep saying the words as much as possible because we, after all, are finite beings. We're limited. And there's no way we can entirely encompass and entirely understand the infinite mind. God is infinite. Ultimately, there's going to be a reason that's beyond you. No matter how many reasons you give, there's always a deeper reason. So Maimonides is saying it's our job to try to understand even the laws that don't really make sense. And there's a bunch of laws. Anyone know any laws that also don't make any sense aside from kosher? No. So, for example, there's a law you can't mix, you can't wear a garment that's sewn together, wool and linen, right? So there's the concept of going to a mikveh, which you're going to discuss. I think it's next week. Going to a ritual bath, the concept of purity and the impurity. Classic case of the red heifer, the red cow. All these are laws that we cannot understand. Yet we see that Moses and King Solomon strived to understand it. Okay, so the question is like this. What's the benefit of contemplating rationals? See on page number 2, the question for discussion. What's the benefit of contemplating rationals for God's law? So let's say it's not a concession. Let's say it's the way it's supposed to be. Why should it be that way? Why didn't God tell us, this is the way it is? Hey, Joe. This is the way it is, and that's it. In fact, though, we find asking questions a very Jewish thing. We have a tradition in the Midrash that Avram, discovered God by asking questions. No one taught Avram that God existed. In fact, for all those who have a little bit of knowledge of the Midrash, it says that Avram's father was a owner and seller of idols. So you definitely know that he didn't tell his children about the one God. Avram asked, how could this be? What made the sun, the cycle? So he came to the conclusion on his own. So we see here that asking questions is a very Jewish thing. So let's discover why. In the Jewish approach, a person is here to serve God, right? We're here to dedicate our life to doing whatever God says, and by that we live better and the world becomes better. And we're supposed to do that with the totality of our being, right? So there's our physical self and there's our emotional self, but then there's our intellectual self. So if I tell you, do whatever you want, but don't think about it, are you serving God intellectually? You're not. So there is an element where we have to serve God intellectually too. We have to try to understand what God said and why he said it. So not only are you allowed to ask why, to try to understand, you're supposed to ask why. On the other hand, you also have to believe. And that's a concept of serving God higher than your logic. What in you is higher than logic? Your will. Your will is higher than logic. The Kabbalah says something fascinating. Kabbalah speaks about where does your will reside. We know your soul rests mostly in your brain, in your heart, mostly in your brain. Your intellect is in your brain. Your emotions are in your heart. Where's your will? So Kabbalah says that there's a space between your skull and your brain. You know this? Your skull and your brain is not right up against your skull. There's a little bit of a space there. A concussion, for example, and since we're talking about sports, right? So it's always on the top of my mind. A concussion is when the brain knocks against the skull. So in that space, which is above your brain, that's where the Kabbalah says that's where will resides. So we see will is above intellect. So you have to understand, and at the same time, you have to try to understand. And that's why we just came from Pesach. What's the main element of Passover? The main element of Pesach is asking questions. Not only are we supposed to ask questions, you have to ask questions. The whole Seder is not a frontal approach, where we sit our kids down and say, listen, kid, let me tell you how it is. And the kid just listens to a story. No, we do things in order for the child to ask questions, right? For example, we take a vegetable, we dip it in the salt water. Do you know why we do that? The only reason why we do that is for the child to ask, why are we doing that? And we cover the mats, or we take the mats off the table. Why? For the child to ask. In fact, there's text number two. Text number two is a little cutout, a little piece of the article. It's in one of the additional readings in the back. There's some additional readings in the back, very interesting articles. One of them is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he says in that article how important it is to ask questions. You know, he quotes over the famous Jewish scientist from Israel. I think a physicist. They asked him, how did you become so smart? So he said, all the other kids, when they came home from school, the mother would ask them, his name is Izzy something. He says, Izzy, the kids, what did you learn today? My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask any good questions today? It's all about asking questions. But Jonathan Sachs says, questions have to be with three conditions. Three conditions to a question. You see me here at text number 2. Number 1, you're asking a question to learn, not to reject and to ridicule. There was a famous professor, he's still alive. His name is Velvel Green. He tells a story. When he was younger, he went with a private audience to the Rebbe, and he asked a bunch of questions. The Rebbe didn't answer it. He had an audience. Then later he became more observant, more traditional, and he came back with an audience to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered all his questions. He said, if you had the answers to my questions all those years ago, how come you didn't answer? Because back then you weren't looking for an answer. You were just looking to ask. But when you ask a question, you have to be a little open and say, and to the answer. Be a little humble. Asking a question requires humility. Otherwise, it's not a question. It's a statement. So number 1, it has to be a genuine search for knowledge. Unlike, he says, the wicked son in the Haggadah. Number 2, you have to understand that you don't know everything. And not only that, you don't have the capacity to know everything. No one knows everything. Even the greatest physicist needs a computer IT guy, right? Everybody needs somebody. So you have to come to terms, again, it requires humility. The fact that you don't know. You have to be comfortable. And think about it. 100 years ago, they thought they knew everything about science, right? They thought they were at the forefront, at the frontier. You think they would imagine 100 years ago? Actually, Einstein was already putting forth relativity 100 years ago. Okay, 120 years ago. If you would tell them about relativity, air travel, all that, you think they would believe you? So what Jonathan Sachs says over here in text number 2 is that what might seem misunderstood or not understood in the last generation could very well be understood in this generation. It could be the same thing with Torah, by the way. I read one of the books we have here is that there was a verse in the Torah. It says that regarding the birth of Moshe, it says that a man from Levi, from the tribe of Levi, went and married a woman from Levi and they had a child. And the commentaries ask a question. It's the only place in the entire Torah that it says such a thing, that a man went and married a woman and had a child. Usually it just says a man had a child. Why did it say that? And for centuries, the rabbis didn't know the answer. Why the Torah spoke in such a peculiar way about the birth of Moshe. You want to know when they figured it out? They figured it out when people started claiming to be the Son of God. When they said, "Oh, look, I'm so amazing. My mother I wasn't conceived by a regular father. My father was God." That's why the Torah says Moshe was an amazing person. He did all these miracles. By his hand, he split the sea, he brought the money, right, the water from the rock, but he was a regular person. That's just one example of sometimes we don't know today, but we know tomorrow, and you have to be okay with that. Number 3, he says, real learning is through living. The best way to learn about kosher, to understand kosher, is to keep kosher. The best way to understand Shabbat is to keep Shabbat. If you're going to leave it as an abstract idea, it becomes very hard to understand. But for But for a person who's in it, who dwells in it, then it becomes very easy. Best example, I'm American. My wife is South American. I understand baseball perfectly. She can't understand baseball. Because to me, I grew up with it. What do you mean? It's a part of my life. To her, it's something new. That's when she goes to sleep, and I watch the playoffs, right? Okay. So on that note, I just want to say, you guys are going to ask questions. I don't have all the answers. That's not a fault of mine. It's because I'm normal and I'm human, and you don't have all the answers too. So, but I encourage everyone to ask questions, and I said you can put your questions in there. If I don't have the answers, I'll research them, and I'll try to do them as best as I can. On that piece of paper. Yeah. Okay, so you have two sides. I mean, I'm trying to limit. Right? Okay, now these are only the questions for. We're going to do a rapid response at the end of class. If you have more questions, you can email them to me, and I'll try my best. Okay, question number 1. We're going to deal with why doesn't the sea split? Why aren't there major miracles today? We read about all these fantastic, terrific miracles that happen in the times of the Torah, but today it doesn't seem. It doesn't seem to happen. Why not? The walls of Jericho are falling down, but today that doesn't seem to happen. It says the old lady had a problem with arthritis. She couldn't stand up straight, so she went to a doctor who was known as a miracle worker. Someone sees her in the waiting room. She walks in all bent over. She walks out. She's walking erect. So a person in the waiting room jumps up, says, "It's a miracle." Says, "It's not a miracle. All he gave me was a taller cane." Right? So the question is how come these miracles don't happen? So before we try to answer the question, we really first have to research who's asking the question. Why are you asking the question? Or from what approach are you asking the question? You have to look into the question or who's asking in order to understand it better. So a question for discussion on page number 5. Beyond curiosity, why do you think a person might ask this question? So you have over here, so a person says, my friend's very sick, and how come God doesn't make a miracle? And right? Or he might say, I have a hard time believing in the miracles. If God would split the sea today, then I'd believe he could do it back then. Or a person might say, our ancestors had it easier, right? Of course they were more observant. Of course they were more religious. If God brought bread down from heaven, you wouldn't believe, right? Of course you'd believe. And the person says, why doesn't God make a miracle for me? Am I an evil person? So you see, learning exercise number 6. Sorry, page number 6. Learning exercise number 1. And you can write this down. It says, what are the advantages or the disadvantages of miracles? You don't want to participate? We have, you're sitting in the front. Okay. Some advantages of miracles, right? Advantages of miracles that it's inspiring, or people are saved. It's exciting. It removes doubt. Disadvantages of miracles is it allows for us to make bad choices because we know, don't worry, God's going to save the day anyway. And when a miracle doesn't happen, then we don't believe anymore. And then it's unpredictable. You don't know when God's going to perform a miracle or not. It's very hard to tell. Okay, so let's go into why God does miracles. Why does God do miracles? What's the point of a miracle? So you see over here, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, who was the rabbi of Prague. He lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Sorry, yeah, he lived in the 1700s. He says something fantastic in text number 3. He says like this. He says, a miracle is not about a result. It means God doesn't make a miracle because naturally the result he wants will not occur. I mean, let's say, for example, the Jewish people were trapped by the sea. And do you think the only way God could save them would be that the sea split? I don't know. What if God could, he can It says God can put thoughts in people's head. He can cause a fleet of, I don't know. Think of any fantastic natural event to happen. God controls everything. He can make a result naturally as well. Miracles are not about results. Miracles are about a statement. Why did God bring the 10 plagues on the Egyptians? Right? Let's take, for example, the plague of darkness. Anything ever bother you about the plague of darkness? Doesn't it seem to stick out? Where's the punishment in the plague of darkness? Right, you have blood, nothing to drink. Right? Frogs, very intrusive. Anything ever bother you about the plague of darkness? Okay, fine. So they didn't have electricity. Remember by Hurricane Wilma, we also didn't have electricity. Okay, so it was for a long time. It was for 6 days. But where's the punishment? Anyone ever hear of the Egyptian god of Ra? Ever? It's called the sun. The king of that time, his name was Ramses. He claimed to be the god of the sun, that he controlled light. So one of the reasons it says that God brought the plague of darkness was to show everybody that, listen here, he's a nothing, and I'm in control of light. I control the water. They worship the Nile. So I control the water. I control the light. I control everything. It's about making statements. So he says over here, why did God make the walls of Jericho fall? Because then people would say, yeah, God sent Moses. But Joshua, that wasn't God. That was military strategy. So God made the first battle. Total crazy super event. The walls just fell into the ground, just collapsed into the ground. And everybody knew, okay, the statement was made. Once the statement is made, then comes Passover. Then we have to pass on the tradition down to our children. So it's very important that we understand. The essential understanding that we gain, that the primary objective is not to obtain an outcome. That's not what it's about. It's about a statement. Once the statement has been made, once the people, whoa. I hit the. Sorry. We're starting all over. Hello. Joe wasn't here for the beginning. Where are we? Here we go. So once we understand that God can do whatever He wants, so for every supernatural salvation in the Bible is an alternative natural solution. God could very well, every single military or super event that happened, God could have made it in a natural way. So the purpose of a miracle is for God to make a statement. Once a statement is made, then comes our part to pass it on. To pass on that statement from time to time. So therefore, there's no real reason for a big miracle. And then also, if you think about it, what is a big miracle proof? We all look at the world in two realms. We have the spiritual and the physical. Right? The fact that God is the boss over the spiritual, that we know. So there's the natural and there's the godly. So if I tell you God split the sea, what does that prove? That God is the boss of nature. But we still see God and nature as two distinct items, two distinct entities. What's a greater miracle? A miracle that breaks nature or a miracle within nature? In nature. Do you know, you guys are going to like this one. You know the only holiday that's going to remain after the coming of Mashiach? Not Yom Kippur. Well, that's for sure. That has to do with drinking. It's the other holiday that has to do with drinking. It's Purim. No, not Sukkot. Because Sukkot marks an event. Purim. Why? Because what does the holiday of Sukkot commemorate? The fact that God protected us against nature, supernaturally. He surrounded us with clouds of glory. But is that really a big deal? If you don't believe God can break nature, then what kind of God do you believe in? A God that can't split water is not a God worth believing. That's a big deal, that God could split water. He created the world something from nothing. Everything after that is no big deal. The biggest miracle is when we see God in nature. And the miracle of Purim is no miracle at all. Think about it. A Jewish woman became queen. That's not miraculous. Right? Just happened to be. Everything in the story of Purim, if you read the story of Purim, it's a long story. It's called the whole Megillah. The whole story of Purim takes place over 7.5 years. We read it in 20 minutes, but it's 7.5 years. So if you take each event individually, it's not miraculous. It's only when we put it together, we step back and we say, hey, look at this whole event, then we see something that's truly miraculous. And that's really the miracle, the greatest miracle. So in the early days of our history, God performed these miracles to establish the principles of our faith. So when God destroys nature, what does he prove? Nothing. He proves that he's God. He proves that he's above nature. That's not the point. The point is that when God guides natural patterns and we can recognize it, that is the greatest miracle. So the question really isn't why big miracles don't happen anymore. The question really is why big miracles ever happened. They shouldn't have happened because that's not what God wants. They only happened because God had to make the statement. Because people were in a state of doubt or a state of confusion. Who's really in control? Once God established that he's in control, then we can move on. Okay? All right. End of topic number 2. Topic number 3. Student page 10. Why do we pray? Let me ask you a question. Everyone over here believes in God, right? And you believe God knows what he's doing, right? So if God decided this person should be sick, or whatever it is, what do? You pray to God. What are you doing? I thought you believe in God. Who are you praying to? If you believe in God, don't pray to God. He knows better. And if you don't believe in God, you say that he doesn't know better, why are you praying to him? Doesn't prayer seem heretical? Anti-belief? No? Well, you say no because everyone prays, but think about it for a second. Right? We believe that God knows best and everything that God does is for the best. Right? It's one of the core principal beliefs of any faith. Everything, God knows best. That's why he's God. But then when something goes wrong, we say, oh God, please, you don't know what you're doing. It really should be this way. Please change it to my way. The way I understand it. But that's not believing in God. Do you think God is so fickle that he's going to change his mind because you ask him? Or do you think God's like, my kid comes over to me, says, Dad, can I have ice cream? I say, no, please. What's he trying to do? Change your mind. So that's the kind of person God is. The interesting thing is, prayer is not a Jewish thing. Prayer is a, prayer is an international thing. 55% of Americans say they pray every day. In fact, the stats say 23 pray weekly, 21 seldom pray, 21% religiously unaffiliated and pray daily. Everyone prays. So there are a few answers to this question, and I'm going to do 2. Number 1 is like this. See, look at text 4a on page 10. When you're praying, you're saying like this. You are vowing, you're saying, I'm going to be a better person. He's saying, you're not saying that God changes will, because God doesn't change his will. But if, let's say, I decide that you, the way you're acting, deserve so-and-so. Right? I say you're behaving very well, you're acting very nicely, you deserve an award. But but now you change your behavior, you don't deserve it anymore. Let me tell you something happened this last week. Last week was the NFL draft. Okay? Football. Right? So 15 minutes before the draft, I heard this on the radio yesterday. 15 minutes before the draft, a video was released of one of the players from college. I don't know. I think he was from Dolphins. Dolphins, yeah. A video was released 15 minutes before the draft of him smoking, I guess marijuana, whatever it is. And what happened is he was really projected to be picked much higher. Instead, he was picked much later. What happened? He's not a good player. What happened was that based on his behavior, he's not the same person he was before, because now his decision making was called into question. The same thing.
$8 million.
What?
Cost them $8 million.
8 million more than that, right? So, so the same thing is when we pray. See over here in text number 4, there's no change in God's will. What happens is, because we say now we're going to be a better person, so God says, okay. So before you deserve this, now that you're a different person, you deserve something else. They tell a story of Moshe, who was a dedicated Jew, very, very religious, and after 50 years, he says, you know something? I deserve a day off. He shaved his long beard. He went to Vegas. He's crossing the street in Bellagio, gets hit by a car. And that's it. He goes up to heaven. And Moshe says to God, God, I served you for 50 years. This is how you repay me? He says, oh, is that you, Moshe? Did I recognize you? Right? So number one is, the real prayer is that it leaves a mark on your identity. You're not the same person. In fact, the word tefillah, which is the Hebrew word for prayer, doesn't mean prayer. It means to connect. Prayer is more of a request. I need something, so I send up a prayer. That is the difference in Hebrew between tefillah, which is reconnect, and bakasha is request. So you're right. If I am where I am right now, and I ask you for something, let's say, why should I give it to you? So if I'm God, I don't change my mind. There's not the change. But if I'm a different person, then I'm not the same person asking. If I reconnect to something that's higher than me, then I can ask. So it's not a change of God's will, because you're changing, and therefore, because you're changing, then you're being rejudged. The second item you see in text number 4b is like this. God, so to speak, has like this. Very, very interesting. Rabbi David Shlomo Eibschitz. He says like this. He says that based on the creation of the world, there's contradictory verses in the creation of the world. One verse, it says that God created the vegetation. The other verse, it says that there was no vegetation because Adam hadn't prayed for rain yet. So which one was it? Did God create the vegetation, or did he not create the vegetation? So the Gemara, the Medrash says that the vegetation was created, but it only came out a little bit from the ground. God was waiting for Adam to pray in order to bring forth the vegetation. So he says like this. So it comes out that God has sort of a plan A and a plan B. So God gives it like this. But if we participate, he wants to see how much we're putting in. If he sees that we're participating, then he gives more. So if we just leave it at the status quo, we don't pray, then that's plan A. But if we pray, and God says, oh, now that I see that you're participating, then I will bless upon request. So why? Because God wants to hear from us. God thirsts for our communication. Imagine we didn't need anything. How often would we pray to God if we didn't need anything? Most of us wouldn't pray at all. In fact, some rabbis say that's why the blessing for food biblically was put after eating, not before. Because before you eat, you're hungry. But after you eat, you forget God, right? The famous story of a guy who was late to a meeting, and he needed a parking space. He says, God, if you help me find a parking space, I'll give 10% to charity. And as he's finishing prayer, a spot right in front of the office building opens up. He says, thank you, God, I found one myself. So that's the way it is. But God wants to hear from us. So what does he do? So he says, listen, I will give you, but I want you to participate. God wants to partner with us. And this is interesting because it means that man is at the center of the universe. We decide what happens, what doesn't. God says, I do a little bit, and let's see how much you participate. If you're involved, then more comes based on you. So every single person plays a major role in the flow of the world. Okay. Question number, which is number 4. Okay, how about this? Want to stop for questions? And for a break. Want to okay, so put it in the bowl. So go ahead. Okay, anyone who wants to write a question, put it in the bowl. Anonymous question. We'll deal with it afterwards. Well, I'm not looking.
No one looks.
Hey, no one else? Wow, I must be doing a good job. I don't want to get a cup, right? Okay. Right. If you want, you can ask questions afterwards. John won't be anonymous. All right. Hey, I warned you. Otherwise, I'm gonna be embarrassed later. Okay. Question number 4 on page number 16. We're doing it at the end. Give time to make another one. Okay. One of the beliefs is that there's one God, right? And God doesn't change. It's one of the carnal, and it's one of the things that are gonna come up later, and why Jews don't accept the Christian Messiah. God doesn't change. If God doesn't change and God is one, there should only be one way to serve him, right? He's one. Oops. So why is there so many different types of ways to serve God? You walk into the Judaic store and there's not one Siddur. There's hundreds and hundreds of Siddur. And some people have their peyot very long. Some people wear it behind their ears. Some people wear it short. There's so many different types of observance in the Torah. We're talking about according to halacha, not talking about some fractions or people who decided to do. No, we're talking about in the scope of Jewish traditional law. So the Sephardim, Ashkenazim, and in Ashkenazim, there's Lithuanians, Galicia, Hungarians. I mean, there's Chabad has a book called the Book of Chabad Customs, and everyone has their own custom. How could that be? Shouldn't everyone be the same? Should we all get together and say, "All right, guys, it's one God. Let's let's fight it out, and that's it." Right. So some people say that it's a unfortunate result of the exile, because it means in the beginning, when there was a Jewish Supreme Court, there was a Sanhedrin. They decided everything on Jewish law. And there was one central government. You gotta start doing that. Oh boy. Because what happens is the keyboard's here, so it keeps hitting the. So it means when there was a central government. Note to self: don't put the keyboard there. Here we go. So when there was a Sanhedrin, so then there was no dichotomy. There was no different ways of serving God. Everyone served God the same way. But when we went into the exile and people were dispersed into different lands, then people picked up different customs. That's what some people think. But the student of the Arizal, Rabbi Chaim Vital, says in text number 5 something unbelievable. He says, check this out. He said, and he wrote this back in the 1500s. That means this concept of different communities existed many hundreds of years ago. And he says that it says in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel says that it talks about the future temple, talks about the temple. And it says that 12 tribes are going to go into the 12 gates. And he understands this to mean that every single tribe has its own entrance into the temple. That means the concept of diversity is not a new thing. It always existed. It existed way back in the desert. Even in the desert, there were different customs. It's not an accident of history. And what's interesting thing is each one of us comes from a different tribe. So really, we're supposed to serve God the way our tribe mandates. The problem is we don't know what tribe we are from. So what do? we serve based on our community. But in reality, everything is according to tribe. And what comes out over here is each tribe, each person has an individual, unique path. It's not an accident. It means when you see a Jew doing something different than what you brought up with, that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. And you see, this is something that the Jewish people are praised with. Look at text number 6 on page 18. It says that Bilam was a prophet. God didn't want the Gentiles to scream, "Oh, we never had a prophet." So God gave them a prophet. And they used him for only bad things. To curse people, for warfare. So when Bilam tried to curse the Jewish people, he was unable. One of the things he says, very famous line, "Matovu o alecha Yaakov." It says how precious and how good the way the Jewish people dwell. How do they dwell? He says he saw them dwelling according to tribes. Each tribe dwelled alone. That seems, today we live in a world of unity and love, and everyone's together, everyone's the same. And here we see in the Torah, we're praising borders, separate. What was he praising? He was praising the fact that what Rabbi Guterman says in this text, based on Rabbi Chaim Vital, he's saying that he was praising each person, each tribe served God according to way it was capable. So, for example, Ruvain, according to Kabbalah, embodies the attribute of chesed, kindness. They have to serve God with kindness. Shimon with gevurah, with discipline, and so on. And the three forefathers, each one of us have an individual way to serve God. So that means it's not our job. It's not our job to be the same. In fact, the same isn't good. Oneness isn't sameness. Does that make sense? Oneness is not sameness. So think about it this way. When you're serving God, are we supposed to nullify ourselves or purify ourselves? The difference is like this. Nullify means that I totally give myself up for whatever God says. I transcend myself. There's no self anymore. God, whatever you say, I do. I lose myself. Some people, it's unfortunate, but some people in the modern times, what do they tell the husbands to do? Yes, dear, no matter what you say. Yes, dear, right? That's a happy marriage. That's not a happy marriage. So if a husband totally loses his identity and loses his opinion and loses his personality, that's a person you want to be married to? That's not a human being. That's a robot. You want a person who can offer your opinion. You just want to be right in the end, right? Right? So, but what? It's called living long, right? So in Hebrew, it's called bittul. Bittul means to nullify ourselves. But the problem with that is when we escape ourselves, we lose ourselves. We lose our unique identity. Then, if God created you, it means you're unique. That means He wants you to serve God the way you're capable of. And when you lose your uniqueness, then you're losing the reason why God created you. Instead, what God wants you is to harness your unique talents to serve Him. Not nullify, but purify. I mean, so if we can say intellectually, we can try to understand, going back to asking the question of why. If we can try to understand and serve God to the best of our ability, and everyone can do their part, right? If I understand that you're special and I'm special and we're all unique, then that takes away automatically violence, especially the religious kind. Why is there violence? Why do people hurt each other? What? Ignorance or a perceived slight. They perceive that you're doing something wrong or you're impeding on my domain, in my territory. You're invading my space. And that could be...
They think they own the truth.
Right. So, exactly. Because I own the truth and you're impeding on that truth by your existing in some other... right? But if I say you're true and I'm true and we're both true, See, when you look at God as only one-dimensional, then that becomes a problem. But if you look at what the Torah says, what it says in the Talmud, that there are 70 faces to the Torah, which means the number is not literal. It means that there's not one way to serve God. Then you don't feel threatened when someone else serves God differently. You love it. Because here, there's something beautiful in that. I've said this a million times. My favorite place to pray in the world is the Kotel. The Kotel, the Western Wall. Want to know why? Not only because it's the holiest place on earth, which is obviously a great place to play, but the fact of the matter is, when I go to Brooklyn, you know where I go to pray? I'm a Chabad, so I go to Chabad's temple. Right? That's the way you are. And if you're Sephardic, you go to a Sephardic temple. In Hollywood, right? In Hollywood, on Sterling Road, there's Young Israel, and down the block there's Bnei Sephardim. The Sephardim go to Bnei Sephardim, the Ashkenazim go to Young Israel, and that's okay. I'm not saying that's something wrong with that. That's good. But one of the things that I love about the Kotel is there is no shul at the Kotel. The Kotel, you're Jewish, and everybody's one, and no one says, "Oh, we don't include him for a minyan because his payos are behind his ears because he's wearing a kippah that's velvet felt and his is knitted." No, we thrive in the diversity. A woman could pray at the Kotel. Woman could pray at the Kotel. There can't be a minyan. Woman could pray at the Kotel. There can't be a minyan at the Kotel. That's something else. Minyan is a different thing than prayer. Woman could pray. In fact, women could even make their own minyan. There just can't be a minyan together with men. It's 10 of one kind and 10 of the other. Apples and apples, oranges and oranges. So it's very important. And by the way, this is very important in today's world. And this is why the message of communism, for example, failed. Because let's all be the same. But we're not the same. And when we all try to be the same, we try to lose our identity, it doesn't work. And we're trying, in society, we're trying to project this feeling of love and oneness. But oneness means when you can understand that I'm different from you and I serve God my way, and that's okay. And you see, this is the problem with obviously accepting you're different. It leads to violence, but only if I understand that you serve a purpose. Think about the heart and the brain. The heart knows that it needs the brain to be a brain, and the brain needs the heart to be a heart. Each one understands that they need each other. And not only that, they understand that they're together in one purpose. And that's how you wipe away, first of all, violence. Number two, you appreciate when someone is serving God different from you. Okay, next topic. Why or how Jews have survived this long? There are three texts, 7a, 7b, 7c. You can read them. They're both very interesting. Text 7a, we're not gonna read in class because that's part of an article in additional reading. You can read it at the end, and I'm going to choose text 7b. Mark Twain. Mark Twain, in very short, on page 22, he says, Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians rose, filled the planet, made a lot of noise. Greeks, Romans, now they're gone. The Jews saw them all, and now is what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. What is the secret of his morality? By the way, this was printed in 1899 in the Harper Weekly magazine. It was a response to a question of, says, the question was, will you kindly tell me why, in your judgment, the Jews have thus ever been, and are even now in these days, of supposed intelligence, the butt of baseless, vicious animosities? That was the question posed to Mark Twain. So the question posed to we're having now. What's the secret to our immortality? Why are the Jews still here? Nobody? Why are we still here? What? Complain a lot. That's the secret. Yes.
Something to God. The belief of continuation. Not putting those words. Continuation on God. Not, you say waiting for the Messiah, but which is like a hope, but it's just a consistent belief continuation, continuing our forefathers.
Right. Tradition Masorah, yeah. Yeah. That's the secret, education. Yeah. It says when God wanted to give the Torah to the Jewish people, he asked for a guarantor. So Jewish people said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God says, they're dead. What kind of guarantee is that? So Moses, he's going to die. So they're thinking, says, our children. God says, now you're talking. So you see here. Oh, not up to that yet. So some people say because we never allowed to assimilate because of anti-Semitism, and some people say because God is our guarantor. Some people say we're very smart, we're very clever, we're very strong-willed. Like you said, with Jews are obsessed with continuity. The interesting medrash, page 24, text 8, between Hadrian. Hadrian was not a friend of the Jews, murdered, slaughtered literally hundreds of thousands of Jews. He once asked Rabbi Yeshua. He says, how do the Jews survive? It must be because the nations of the world allow it to survive. Is the lamb so great to survive the 70 wolves? No, it must be because the Jewish people are compared to the lamb. Nations of the world, 70 wolves. Why 70? Because those are the 70 children of Noah after the flood. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Look at text number 9. It says in Isaiah, just like the heaven and earth that I make stand before me as new, says God, so stand your seed and name. That's true. That the nations of the world, there's always been one welcoming nation in the world. That means when the Christians were persecuting us, the Muslims welcomed us. And when the Muslims are persecuting us, the Christians welcome us. But that's only because God decreed it to be so. So an interesting thing over here in the verse, he says two things. He says, "So stands your seed and your name." What's the difference between seed and name? Seed means we'll never be physically eradicated. There'll always be Jews, but it's possible for there to be Jews and they don't know they're Jews. You have plenty of people like that today. They have no idea they're Jewish. And you have people who think they're Jewish and they're not Jewish. Right? Like the man who comes to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I have to be a Kohen." He says, "I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You can't just walk in decide you're a Kohen. There are rules. They'll be instead very important have to be a Kohen. No matter you name a price, takes out his checkbook, Rabbi, whatever amount of I'll give you." Says the rabbi said, "I'm sorry, you can't buy your this isn't an election, in some country, you can't just buy the election. So this is campaign reform." So he said, so no, I has to. So the rabbi said, "I don't know. Why is it so important for you to be a Kohen?" He said, "Because my grandfather was a Kohen, my father was the Kohen. I have to be a Kohen, right?" So it's not just that the people that are Jewish will exist, but number two, the fact that their name, they'll never be spiritually. There'll always be people who practice Torah who will identify as Jews. And interesting thing over here, Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was a very, very interesting rabbi. Very, very fire. He was no nonsense. He took on some tough challengers in his time. He lived in a very volatile time. And he says, you know what the greatest miracle of all time is?
69.
I would argue miracle on ice, but you got it. The greatest miracle of all time is not the splitting of the sea, is not the man falling down from heaven and the water from the rock, as you see in text number 10, page number 25. He says the greatest miracle of all time is the fact that we're here. That's the greatest miracle of all time. Because think about it, the splitting of the sea was a one-time event. It lasted for a few hours. It lasted for one night, but it was a one-time event. Folding of the manna was a 40-year event. Existence of the Jewish people, 4,000 years now. That's, it's not like there's ever been a time where someone hasn't tried to eradicate us. Always been a time where someone has had in their head, I'm going to be the one. It's almost like the president of the United States who says, I'm going to be the one to make peace in the Middle East, right? There's always been one Shmendrik who always wants to say, I'm going to be the one. And that's why, one of the main focuses of the Haggadah is when we pick up our cup of wine and we sing Vihi Sha'amda. Pay attention to what it means. It says in English or in Spanish, para español. Right? It says what does it mean? It says and it's to this. It's to this. The fact that in every generation people try to eradicate us and wipe us out. But the fact is, God doesn't let. But that's not good enough. It's too simple of an answer. That God protects us. That we can do whatever we want, and God will protect us. That's a nice answer, but it's not. It's not giving us enough credit, and we deserve some credit, because you see in text number 11, the Jewish people are called a stiff-necked nation, a stubborn nation, and that's driven our haters crazy. We're very stiff-necked. They've tried to assimilate us and get us to become like them in every way, and we could have, right? But we're very stubborn. We have free will. It's not like we can't. We could. We just don't. That means we're all here today identifying as Jews is because somebody. You see the picture, by the way? That picture was taken in 1938, something right across this one. We're all here today because our parents and grandparents made tough choices, made very, very tough choices to remain Jewish, despite the fact that there were people who didn't want them to be Jewish, and many of our ancestors gave up their lives. It's not like we're looking for, this is not jihadi school. We're looking to give up our life. One guy wrote one of those comics in a newspaper on top of a Palestinian baby ward. It said, "Caution, live ammunition." Right. So it's not like we're looking to become martyrs. That's not what we're looking for. In this week's portion, it says, "B'chai behem," you shall live with them. But if push comes to shove, we've made the choice. Our ancestors have made the choice to live as a Jew. Die as a Jew rather than live otherwise. And finish off this topic in text number 12. And it says, as the modern world opens, Jewry and Judaism are still very much on the scene. A fascinating historical drama is revealed. The auctioneer's time, the buyer's oblivion. All nations are going, gone. But for Jewish people, it's going, and in the third word, gone, is never uttered. Okay, number 6. Number 6 is. Oh, sorry. There.
A flame could be bright, brilliant, and beautiful, but no one expects it to last forever. It will run out of fuel for combustion. It will suffocate when surrounding oxygen dwindles. It will surrender when stormy winds howl around it. But there is one flame that indeed perseveres, although every mighty force tried to stamp it out. Despite the winds of time that eroded Greece and the shifting sands that erased Rome, despite having its holy ground ripped from beneath its feet, its fuel stolen and manipulated to form false fires, and its wick split and scattered across the globe and across the ages. On January 1st, 2000, as the world celebrated the turn of the new millennium, the New York Times ran a special Millennium Edition with 3 front pages. The third of these pages was futuristic, featuring projected headlines of January 1st, 2100. A virtual Congress, miniature dinosaurs created via biogenesis as household pets, robots demanding equality and the right to vote, the welcoming of Cuba as an American state, official misuse of weather control satellites, almost lost in a sea of startling headlines and imaginative fine print, tucked away in the left-hand corner of the spread. A couple of familiar lines hold their own. Jewish women and girls light Shabbat candles today, 18 minutes before sunset. In New York, 4:39 p.m. Elsewhere, Touch for Local Time and for Information, AEVT. This was a parody on what had been a regular Friday edition ad promoting awareness of upcoming Shabbat candle lighting times. The genuine ad had been sponsored by Joseph Wassner and later by Joseph Gutnick, and it ran from February 1988, but ended before the turn of the millennium. No one had expected the Times to include a similar, brief, unspectacular message in their front-page Millennium Edition futuristic piece. Rather, in a wonderfully telling move, the Times, on their own initiative, found it both obvious and also noteworthy that in an ever-changing, rapidly progressing swirl of discoveries and events, one thing at least would remain as steadfast as ever: the eternal flame of Jewry.
Cool. Okay, next question. Why don't Jews accept the Christian Messiah? All right. I don't know how much you read up on this or not, but we'll try to keep it brief. Well, this is not popular these days, but in the old times, Christian theologians dealt with a very big theological problem. That if he came to save the Jews, how come Jews don't accept him? So what they did was they forced the Jews into debates, hoping to prove from the Jewish text that that the Jews were wrong and they were right. There's only one debate in recorded history, I mean, up until modern times, that a Jew was given free carte blanche to talk, to say whatever he had to say. Most times the Jews were not allowed to say whatever they wanted, and it was a one-sided debate. Well, it wasn't really a debate, it was just accusations, and the Jews couldn't answer. At one time was in the 1200s with the Ramban, Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman. The king was James of Aragon, very famous king, and there was a man named Friar Paul, or Pablo Cristiani, whose original name was Shaul, who was a convert to Christianity. He was Jewish, and he went to James Aragon and he said, I'm a Jew, I know the Talmud. Remember, most people back then couldn't read, kings included. And he said, not only, I can prove from the Jewish text that Christianity is right. And James Aragon was actually a friend of the Nachmanides. And Nachmanides said, listen, if you want me to speak, want me to answer, you got to let me answer. And this is the only time that he was allowed. And he went and wrote down what he said, and the Christians also went and wrote down their arguments. So it's a very early recorded debate. We actually have many recorded debates. And in the middle of the debate, Nachmanides, he was supposed to only address this guy, Friar Paul, or Fray Paul, but in the middle he went and he addressed James of Aragon straightforward. Look at text number 13a. And he says like this. And here are 2 points to his argument. What he says. He says that it's one thing if you start off with a basis that makes sense, an intellectual basis that makes sense, and you say, oh, there's something on the outskirts, on the edges of your religious beliefs that doesn't make any sense. Okay, fine. Then, so if I tell you the splitting of the sea doesn't make any sense, does that affect your belief in God in Judaism, in creation of the world? No. You take away any miracle, right? That doesn't take away your belief in God, the oneness of God, or the creation. That's not a problem for us. What Nachmanides says in this text over here, he says the problem here is the whole basis doesn't make any sense. You're saying you're working from the outside in. Your whole basis doesn't make any sense. There was once an anti-Semitic baron who went to Baron Rothschild and said, "All you Jews are into money." He says, "No, we're not." Yeah, you go back and forth. He said, "I'll prove it to you." So they pass a poor tailor. He said, "I'll give you $100,000." He says, "if all you got to do is believe in 3 things. Number 1, that Mary was a virgin. Number 2, that her child was God's child. And number 3, that he had 4,000 students, and he fed the starving 4,000 students with only 3 loaves of bread.
Gave them a little bit.
What?
Just gave them
A crumb.
all a little bit.
So the tailor says, give me a couple of days. He comes back in a couple of days. He comes back as a tall, strapping man. Says, $100,000 is a lot of money. I don't need all the money. So I brought in a partner. And here's what he answers. He says, the fact that Mary was a virgin, I believe. The fact that the child was God's child, he believes. The fact that he had 4,000 students, I believe. The fact that he fed them with 3 loaves of bread, he believes. And the fact that he was killed, I believe. The fact that he was erected, he believes. Now give me my money, right? So he said, what Nachmanides is saying something over here. He tells them, you were born up as a Christian, and you were indoctrinated with this belief. So the belief in the Immaculate Conception and all this, it makes sense to you. But to us, it doesn't make any sense. So we can adopt such a faith. So to you, it makes sense, no problem. Keep it. But for us, it can't make sense. So for example, like this. So one of the things that is at the core of the Christian belief is the Immaculate Conception, that God impregnated Mary, right? This is a very big problem for us because we believe there's, let's say, going back to the miracles. I'm going to try to interlace all the topics we're discussing. Going back to the subject of miracles. Really, all miracles happen in the structure of the world, right? There has to be water to split water. There has to be a heaven to water, for manna to fall from heaven. But the greatest miracle of all time is something from nothing, creation. And that is something only God can do. That, in fact, defines God, the ability to create something from nothing. Anytime we're going something against the definition of God, that we can't accept. So one of the foundational beliefs of Judaism is that God is not descriptive. He doesn't take any form. So you want to tell me that one miracle didn't happen, one miracle did happen? Fine, no problem. We can argue the point. You can believe yes or no. But once you go against what we believe God is, we can't entertain that. You're undermining the whole belief in what God is. It's not that a virgin can't become pregnant. Let's say a virgin does become pregnant. That's not the problem. If you would have told me that his mother became pregnant and no one was involved, okay, well, I don't know, maybe. I mean, hard to believe, but okay, it's a miracle. I know. But once you're telling me God got involved, no, sorry. That's that we can do. And it's not like we don't have things we don't believe in. We believe also. There's certain things that don't make really that much sense to us, but there has to be a reason. So you believe. So someone once said like this: if you don't believe any, someone remarked about every story, that a righteous man, a holy person made a miracle, right? There's a million stories of holy, righteous men doing miracles. Rabbi Akiva, the Rebbe, whatever it is. So someone once said, if you believe every story, you're an idiot. If you don't believe any of the stories, you're an heretic. You're a non-believer. Because every story is possible. So we believe, but on top of that belief has to be reason. Something has to make sense. When the Jews stood by Mount Sinai and God said, "Do you want the Torah?" What did the Jews say? Remember? What did the Jews say? They said, "Nasa, we will do, and Nishma, we will hear." What's the difference? Nasa means we believe. God, whatever you say, I believe. They tell a story of a priest who was standing in the river. He was baptizing people, and a Jewish drunkard walks by. They say, "Hey, you've been saved yet?" He says, "No." Come here. So he takes him and says, "Do you believe in the Savior?" He said, "Do you have the Savior?" He says, "No." Puts him in the water. So do you now believe in the Savior? He says, "No." So, do you know the Savior now? It's going back and forth. Finally, the drunkard says, "Are you sure you lost him down there? Because I don't see him anywhere." Right? So there are things, of course, we believe, but it's very important for us to have intellect. But the more you understand, the more your belief pervades you. Your seichel, your intellect, your intellectual understanding bolsters your belief. In fact, there's a word for blind faith. It's called credolatry. That's not what Judaism is. We don't have a blind faith. We try to understand as much as possible. Going back to what we said before, asking the question why. You're allowed to ask questions why, but so we have to we have to try to understand. So when you tell me something that happens and it goes against our seichel, it goes against our intellect, that can be. You're gonna say it's a matter of faith, but then the problem with that is, but when your article of faith goes against what our tradition, there's not one source of such faith in our text. Think about it. He supposedly lived at the destruction of the around the time of the Second Temple. You know who lived at that time? Around that time? Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, all the great rabbis. This is what Nachmanides is telling them. How come not one of those rabbis who lived in his time became Christian? Not one. Does it make sense? Doesn't make sense. If it was so important, then we would have a tradition of it happening. We don't. The belief is not in our tradition. The belief doesn't make any sense. Therefore, it can be. It's not for us. Right. I remember watching a documentary that there's some theologians that doubt he ever existed. We don't know. Don't tell our Christians friends this, but they use the Talmud. But there's a whole debate whether the person discussed in the Talmud is him. We like to think that now they're assimilated people, and now they're heretical people, non-believers. But back then, in the times of the temple, everyone was perfect. It's not true. It's a furthest thing from the truth. Furthest thing from the truth. In fact, at the time of the Second Temple, there was a massive fight in the Jewish community between observant, called Pharisees, and other groups of Jewish people. There was someone called Essenes, which historically Jesus probably came from. The Essenes, who believed in going to the mikveh many times. That's where the concept of baptism comes from, and they were celibate. That's where celibacy comes from for priests. I mean, so whether he existed or not, I mean, they don't know for sure, and unfortunately for them and their belief, even if he existed, it wasn't a rarity. Back then, people saying they were the Son of God was very normal, because to say that you're special, you can't just say you're special. They had to back it up with some text. Anyway, so the Nachmanides tells him, so number one, we can believe in your belief in the Immaculate Conception. It doesn't go with us intellectually, and it goes against our faith traditionally. Then he tells them number two. Then the second part of Christianity, what's very important for them, is the fact that he's the Messiah. Right? This is very important for them. That he came once and he's coming back. So look what Nachmanides says. And now you can see, by the way, why he wasn't a big fan. They weren't a big fan of his. By the way, you can buy the books. It's called The Debate of Nachmanides. There's, you see here, Hyman Maccaboy, right? You can buy it. It's very interesting stuff. And he says, you're trying to come to us, to the Jewish people, and use our text to prove that he came. Okay, so let's use our text. And the 8th day of Passover, we read about a utopian time when Messiah comes. Right, Joe? We read about that no nation will lift up weapon against another nation. Man will not learn warfare anymore. There will be even peace amongst the animals. Worldwide peace and utopia and plenty. Nachmanides says, since he arrived on the scene, there's never been more murder, more bloodshed, more strife, more plague, death, starvation than when he arrived on the scene. So maybe he is, so he can't be the Messiah. Not according to us. Listen, you want to believe whatever you want to believe, no problem. But don't make it a Jewish belief. You want to come and say, this is what we believe the Jewish people, this is what we believe the Messiah is. We have no problem. We have our own quirky stuff that we believe in. We're the people who are eating crackers for a week and shaking branches and lemons. We're not ones to laugh upon other people's quirky beliefs and practices. Go ahead. I have no problem. But when you want to come and say this is what we believe, whoa. Sorry, doesn't add up. Our text doesn't add up. By the way, I just want to point out, it's very important not to get into debates and discussions with these people, because they have their 15, 20 texts, and they're very good at debating. We're giving here a brief overview, and the person doing the debating, first of all, was forced into it. Jewish people, it's never been our style to debate, because only bad comes from a debate. Only bad. In fact, Nachmanides wrote down the debate. You know what they did to him? They wanted to kill him for writing against the Lord. So they said, you were only allowed to say it at the debate. No one allowed you to write it down. Once the debate was over, you weren't allowed to write it down. He had to run away, and he lived to like 90 years old. And he was like in his 80s. Sorry, when he was in his 70s. And this is going in the late 1200s. It's not like today you get on a flight. He had to run away. And it says when Nachmanides came to Jerusalem, there wasn't a minion of Jews in Jerusalem. With his own money, he paid for Jews to move to Jerusalem to make a minyan. In fact, there's a temple, a shul, in the old city called Nachman, the Ramban Shul, and it was up and it was functioning until 1948, when the Jews established a state. 1948. So our Jordanian friends went and destroyed it, and all that was left was an arch. It was called the Churba, the ruins. And now they rebuilt it. But they say this is what Nachmanides did. And at the end of the debate, look at text 13c. King James says, I never saw somebody who was so wrong but argued his point so well. That's what King James says. James of Aragon. He says, you're wrong, but you argued your point. Very well. So we see over here that we can't be Christian because it goes against everything we can. In fact, I'm going to send out a link on the post class email. You see over there, there's something on the email called the VHS. I don't know how many times I have it, but I'm going to send out a link to the class. You guys can watch it, from Rabbi Emanuel Shachar. Rabbi Emanuel Shachar was a rabbi. He unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. He was sick, and he was an unbelievable genius. Unbelievable genius. And he was well versed in mysticism. I have some books over here. He translated some of the most difficult concepts in Jewish mysticism into English. And he was given permission by the Rebbe to study the New Testament. Usually Jews, we stay away because there's nothing they can offer us that we don't already have. So we stay away from it, right? But back then in the 60s, and the kids were falling in for cults and then also started Jews for J, right? And because before, if you watch the video, it's 2.5 hours, but it's really good stuff. And he said before they called themselves, Christians or Hebrew Christians, but then they said Jews for Jesus. It's the most Jewish you can be. Just believe in him. So in order to refute their arguments, he had to know. And so he says that's the worst thing that's happening now. People coming and saying, and they don't go and they don't talk to a guy like me who was born, in a observant home, who's going to tell them, listen to me a favor, go fly a kite. They go to usually people who are not so well educated, and they go, listen, this is what your Judaism believes. It takes a very strong-willed mind person to stand up to such a person. So don't get into debates. And
you ever watch them on TV?
No, I don't.
It's incredible.
So if I'm watching TV, I'm watching sports. You mean those guys? You're healed. You're healed. One of those guys?
No, not those guys.
Oh.
Not those guys. This guy comes out and he calls everybody my beloved, and he's wearing a polish. And I said, why is he wearing polish? He's just talking.
Right.
And it's got,
Yeah. Because they want to show that they're Jewish. Because if they come to you and they say, listen, we're Christian. You want to be Christian too? They'll say, listen, do me a favor. As it is, I don't go to shul. I'm not going to church. Leave me alone. I have enough problems with my own. That line from the Frisco Kid. Remember when the guy's talking to the Indian? He says, our God can do anything. So the Indian says, stop calling it our God. I have enough trouble with my God. Keep your God for yourself, right? So, but they're very sly, and you got to be very, very careful with these guys. Anyway, last point. What's with the yahrzeit candles? What's with the fire? We love lighting candles. Not talking about Hanukkah candles. We're talking about yahrzeit candles. Why do we light a candle for yahrzeit? So it can't be accepted by reason. The prophets never accepted. Mind, faith, right? Okay, we said before. Okay, the true Messiah will. Sorry. Okay. Why do we light candles? So we see over here that it started out. Look at text number 14. It started out that back in the days before electricity, people would donate candles. Now I fundraise and I tell people it's to pay FP&L. They laugh. I say it's not a joke. I literally have to pay FP&L. It's not a joke. But back then, people would donate candles. Same thing, right? So on the day of Yom Kippur, which is the day of atonement, as you're doing a mitzvah, we spoke about in the last course, doing a mitzvah in the memory of a loved one. So doing mitzvah, they would bring a candle to the shul on the day of Yom Kippur, when that's a day when obviously God is present in the temple. It's a very holy day, and it says over there in the Midrash, says God says, "Light a candle before me, and I shall guard over your souls, which are cold candles." By the way, interestingly enough, there's a custom amongst some people to light a beeswax candle. If you notice in Hanukkah, we also make sure to light a beeswax if you can candle. But even a yahrzeit candle, beeswax. Why? Because the Hebrew word for beeswax is shava, shin ayin vav hey, which has the same letters as the words in the verse in Isaiah, I think. It says that those who are dwelling in the earth will wake up and sing your praise, which is talking about the resurrection of the dead, which speaks about our belief in Messianic times. So we see over here that it started out. The reason why we started out, you're doing a mitzvah on behalf of a loved one. But why candle? Help an old lady across the street. Instead of the Publix guy loading the car, you will load the car, right? So where is the concept of a candle? So we see that. So it said atonement on Yom Kippur is for everybody. Okay, so a flame is like a candle, because the flame is the one thing we see in this world that's not content with being where it is. It's always moving. Why is it always moving? So it's explained in the Tanya that the source of fire, the spiritual source of fire is above. The spiritual source of water is below. Water always goes downward. Fire always jumps upward. So what's holding the fire down? The candle. Doesn't want to be here, but it has to be. It's kind of like a college kid studying for his exams. He'd rather be in his bed, eating nachos and watching TV, but he knows he has to study. Right? So that's why neshama is compared to a candle. But in reality, any mitzvah we do for a shul, coming from a shul, any mitzvah we do is good for the memory of a soul. So when the soul on high witnesses this act, it takes pleasure seeing it's remembered and it's cherished. Okay, so next week, the questions we're going to discuss is that we're going to discuss more questions than this week. Okay. We're going to discuss what's with the Jewish star, how does it going into a bath purify, why do people become pure to impure, why there's so many laws, do's and don'ts, why do we shake when we pray? You see that? Jews always shake. Right? And why do we have separate seating? And why is Israel so important to Jewish people? We've been out of Israel for already 2,000 years. Let go. And what's with the animal sacrifices in the Torah? If you look at the book of Leviticus, animal sacrifices are